On a Tuesday afternoon in October of 2023, a plumber named Gary Hetrick was running new copper line beneath the front porch of a house on Sycamore Hill Road in Dawson County, Georgia, when his work light caught something in the dirt that wasn't dirt. A small wooden cross, hand-carved about 4 inches long, attached to a short length of chain. He picked it up and turned it over. On the back, scratched into the wood with something pointed, were 3 letters: MDL. Gary set it on the porch railing and finished his work. Then he walked to his truck and sat there for a while, because there was something about the cross that didn't sit right. The way it was down in the dirt, not dropped but placed, arranged at the base of the foundation support post as if it had been put there with intention. The house had been empty for 6 months. The previous owner had died in February. His name had been Dale Pritchard, and he had lived on Sycamore Hill Road for 43 years. Gary Hetrick called the Dawson County Sheriff's Office the next morning. What that cross unlocked, and who MDL was, and what Dale Pritchard had done and hidden and carried for 4 decades, that is a story about what a community trusts because it needs to trust something, and what a killer understands about the nature of that need. But before we get to any of that, we have to go back to the beginning. Because to understand what the cross meant, you first have to understand who put it there and why. Dawson County in 1980 had the particular character of small Georgia mountain communities in that era. Appalachian at its edges, Southern Baptist at its core, organized around the kind of social geography where your family name told people most of what they felt they needed to know about you before you opened your mouth. Dawsonville, the county seat, was tobacco and apple country, feed stores and church bazaars, and the Dawson County Fair in September that people came back for, even when they'd moved away and said they were done with small towns. The Lundquist family had been in Dawson County for 2 generations, having come down from Chattanooga in the 1940s when Margaret Lundquist's father took a forestry job with the state. Margaret had grown up in the county, married a local man named Dennis Lundquist, and settled into the life that the community offered: a small ranch house on Miller Creek Road, a vegetable garden, a part-time job at the county clerk's office 3 mornings a week. Dennis ran a small engine repair shop out of the barn. They had 1 daughter, Miriam. Miriam Dale Lundquist was 22 years old in June of 1980. She had her mother's height and her father's stubbornness, and a laugh that her co-workers at the Dawson County Diner described as the kind that could turn a bad shift around. She had graduated from North Georgia College 2 years earlier with a degree in education and was substitute teaching while she waited for a permanent opening in the county school system. She carved things out of wood, small figures mostly, birds and horses, and once a very credible fox, which she gave away to people she liked and which her mother kept on the windowsill above the kitchen sink. She wore a small wooden cross on a chain that she had made herself, which she had worn every day since she was 16. On the back of it, scratched in with a pocket knife, were her initials, MDL. On the evening of June 17, 1980, Miriam Lundquist left the diner after closing her shift at 9 o'clock and drove her 1977 Datsun toward Miller Creek Road. She never arrived. Dennis Lundquist called the diner at 10:15, when Miriam was more than an hour late and had not answered the phone at her apartment. The closing waitress confirmed that Miriam had left at 9, that she had said goodnight to the cook, that her car had been in the lot when the waitress herself left at 9:20. By 10:40, Dennis was driving the route between the diner and Miller Creek Road himself, his headlights sweeping the shoulders of the 2-lane road. He found the Datsun at 11:02. It was pulled off the road at an angle that suggested it had not been parked deliberately. 2 wheels on the grass, the driver's door standing open, the interior lights still on. The key was in the ignition. Miriam's purse was on the passenger seat. Her jacket was on the floor. There was no sign of a struggle inside the car, and there was no sign of Miriam. By midnight, Dennis had called the Dawson County Sheriff's Office and the State Highway Patrol, and by 1 o'clock in the morning, deputies were walking the road shoulder in both directions from the Datsun with flashlights. And Margaret Lundquist was sitting in a deputy's cruiser at the side of the road. Because she could not sit at home, and she could not walk, and she did not know what else to do with herself. By the following morning, June 18th, with no sign of Miriam, and no witnesses, and no clear evidence at the scene of what had happened, or why, the Dawson County Sheriff's Office opened a missing persons investigation. The car was impounded. The interior was processed. One partial fingerprint was lifted from the steering wheel that did not match Miriam's, and which was photographed, preserved, and classified as inconclusive. Too partial for a positive identification by the technology available in 1980. It was placed in an evidence envelope and sealed. It would wait there for 41 years. What was not noted in the initial report, but what two neighbors would later recall when asked, was that a blue pickup truck had been parked on the shoulder of the Diner Road sometime around 9 that evening. A blue Chevrolet C10, one neighbor would eventually say. Newer looking, clean. Neither neighbor knew who the truck belonged to. Neither was asked in 1980. Detective Carl Simmons of the Dawson County Sheriff's Office had been on the job for 9 years when Miriam Lundquist disappeared. And he was, by his own description, in a 1994 newspaper interview. A man who did not forgive himself easily for cases he did not close. He was 44 that summer, a Dahlonega native, a deacon in his church, and the kind of investigator who spent his own gas money driving county roads on Sunday afternoons because he didn't have anything better to do with the feeling. In the first month, the investigation moved through several threads simultaneously. The first was a man named Paul Eckard, an ex-boyfriend who had been seen arguing with Miriam at a gas station in Dawsonville 3 weeks before her disappearance. Eckard was questioned twice, provided an alibi for the evening of June 17th that 2 witnesses confirmed, and was eliminated by the end of July. But the questioning had taken 3 weeks longer than it should have, because the department's resources were also engaged with a robbery case that summer. And the delay in clearing Eckard had cost the investigation momentum it would not easily recover. The second thread was the partial fingerprint. Detective Simmons submitted it to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Latent Print Unit in August of 1980. The GBI's response came back 6 weeks later. The print was not of sufficient quality for comparison against the state database. It was returned to the evidence envelope. Simmons asked that it be kept. His supervisor agreed, somewhat reluctantly, given that fingerprint storage took space and the case had no named suspect against whom to compare it. Meanwhile, the Lundquist family did what families do. Dennis drove the route between the diner and Miller Creek Road twice a week for the remainder of 1980. Margaret called Detective Simmons every Friday morning for 2 years. Not to demand, she said later, but just so he knew she hadn't stopped. Simmons took every one of those calls. He told her every Friday for 2 years that the case was still open and that he had not stopped either. In November of 1980, Miriam Lundquist's body was found by a deer hunter in a shallow depression in the woods off Lumpkin Campground Road, 4 miles from where her car had been found. She had been there since June. The medical examiner established cause of death and confirmed that the case was now a homicide investigation. The cross she always wore was not with her. It was not found at the scene. The investigation intensified for 6 months, and then, with no new leads and no new evidence and a partial fingerprint that could not be matched, it slowed. By 1982, it was cold. Dale Pritchard had been Dale Pritchard of Sycamore Hill Road the whole time. By 1987, 7 years had passed. Detective Simmons had been promoted to sergeant and had taken on supervisory duties that meant less time in the field. Though he had never removed the Lundquist case from the active shelf he kept in his personal office space. He reviewed it every September, which was the month the annual Dawson County Fair ran and which was, for reasons he couldn't fully articulate, when he thought about Miriam most. By 1993, the Lundquist family had changed in the ways that grief changes people. Not broken, but reconfigured around a space that had no way of being filled. Dennis Lundquist had sold the engine repair shop in 1989 and retired early. He was not well. Margaret still kept the carved figures on the windowsill above the kitchen sink, the birds, the horses, the fox. She had not moved them. She told her sister once that moving them felt like the last thing she was able to do for Miriam, which was nothing, and she wasn't ready to do nothing yet. By 2001, Sergeant Simmons had retired. He took the case file, or rather a copy of it, every page, with him in a banker's box. His wife had stopped asking about it years ago. He kept it in the corner of his home office and pulled it out in September. By 2015, 35 years on, the partial fingerprint from the steering wheel of Miriam Lundquist's 1977 Datsun was still sitting in an evidence envelope in the Dawson County Sheriff's property room. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation had, in the intervening decades, developed a substantially more capable latent print database, and more importantly, the technology to enhance and reprocess partial prints that had previously been deemed insufficient for comparison. Nobody had sent the envelope back to the GBI. The Lundquist case was cold, and the property room had a lot of envelopes, and the years had a way of making what had not happened yet feel like what would never happen. Then, in October of 2023, a plumber named Gary Hetrick reached into the dirt beneath a porch on Sycamore Hill Road. Every case on this channel is built from weeks of research, working through old documents, property records, court files, and the memories of families who never stopped waiting. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, please take a second to like this video and subscribe. Drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. We read every one. Now, let's get back to what was under that porch. Gary Hetrick's call to the Dawson County Sheriff's Office on a Wednesday morning in October 2023 was handled initially as a curiosity. A deputy was dispatched to the property on Sycamore Hill Road, photographed the cross, noted the initials MDL, and brought it back to the department. It sat on a detective's desk for 11 days. On the 12th day, Detective Pamela Okafor, who had joined the Dawson County Sheriff's Office in 2019 and who had, as part of her standard onboarding, reviewed the department's open homicide files, looked at the cross and looked at the initials and went back to the Lundquist file. Miriam Dale Lundquist. The cross she always wore, described by her mother in a statement dated July 1980. Small, wooden, hand-carved, initialed MDL. L on the reverse. Never found at the scene. Detective Okafor called Pamela Simmons, Carl Simmons's daughter, because Carl Simmons had died in 2018 and his daughter had inherited the banker's box. Then Okafor called the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. The fingerprint enhancement process used today works by applying digital filtering and ridge detail recovery to partial latent prints that older technology could not resolve, pulling legible ridge lines from impressions that once would have been discarded as too incomplete to use. The GBI's cold case latent print unit applied this process to the 1980 partial from the Datsun steering wheel. It took 3 weeks. The resulting enhanced print was entered into the state's AFIS database, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System. which cross-references prints against all known offenders in the state's records. The match came back on a Thursday evening in January 2024. Detective Okafor was still at her desk when the notification arrived. The name in the match field was Dale Reston Pritchard, Sycamore Hill Road, Dawsonville, Georgia. Fingerprinted in 1976 on a misdemeanor charge that had never resulted in prosecution and that had never connected him to anything. Until now. Dale Pritchard had lived 4 miles from the diner where Miriam Lundquist worked. He had died in February of 2023, 8 months before Gary Hetrick found the cross. She read the name twice. Then she called her supervisor and told him to come in. What the subsequent investigation assembled over the following months was a portrait of a man that Dawson County had known and trusted and passed in the street for 43 years. Dale Pritchard had come to Sycamore Hill Road in 1980, that spring, just months before Miriam Lundquist disappeared. From a previous address in Hall County where, records showed, he had been the subject of a harassment complaint filed by a young woman who had declined to press charges. He was 29 in 1980, unmarried, employed at a lumber yard outside Dawsonville, and known in the community as a quiet, self-contained man who kept his property neat and showed up when the church needed help putting up a new fence or moving furniture for a widow. He drove a blue Chevrolet C10. In Dawson County, none of that had ever been a reason to look at him closely. He had been, by all accounts, simply a neighbor. Investigators working the 2024 reconstruction interviewed more than 30 people who had known Pritchard over the decades. Several recalled, when asked directly, small things that had not seemed notable at the time. A habit of driving slowly past the diner on summer evenings. A comment he had made once at a church social in 1982, that a woman who drove alone at night was asking for trouble. A comment that had landed wrong in the room and then been forgotten because people forget comments that land wrong when they don't have a frame to put them in. An instance described by a former co-worker when Pritchard had mentioned knowing things about the Lundquist case that had not been publicly reported and which the co-worker had dismissed as small-town speculation. The co-worker, when contacted in 2024, remembered the comment precisely. He said it had bothered him at the time, and then he had put it away because he couldn't do anything with it. And then the years went, and he hadn't thought about it in 20 years. On March 14, 2024, Detective Pamela Okafor and 2 GBI agents went to the Pritchard Estate's attorney to present the findings and to formally request access to the remaining property. The investigation's conclusion, filed with the Dawson County District Attorney's Office in April 2024 and publicly reported in May, named Dale Reston Pritchard as the individual responsible for the abduction and death of Miriam Dale Lundquist on the night of June 17, 1980. No arrest was made, because Dale Pritchard had been dead for 14 months. The case was closed as solved. Dawson County absorbed the news, the way small communities absorb truths they didn't want, but had always half suspected were there. With a particular silence, and then with a particular volume, and then with the slow work of reconciling what they knew about a man with what the man had actually been. Margaret Lundquist had died in 2019. She never knew. Dennis Lundquist died in 2021. He never knew. What remained, when the case was closed and the press coverage faded and Sycamore Hill Road went quiet again, was this. Miriam Lundquist carved things from wood because she liked making something from nothing, because she liked giving things away. Because a small wooden cross on a chain was a way of carrying something that mattered to her, without making a production of it. She wore it every day for 6 years. She was 22 years old when it was taken from her. She was a substitute teacher waiting for a permanent position, a daughter who left carved birds on her mother's windowsill, a woman who could turn a bad shift around with one laugh. Her mother kept the carved figures on the windowsill for the rest of her life. The birds, the horses, the fox. A small gallery of her daughter's hands, unmoved because moving them was the last thing. And the last thing was not something Margaret Lundquist was prepared to do. The cross that Dale Pritchard had placed under the porch of his house in 1980, placed, not dropped, arranged at the base of a foundation post, 43 years in the ground, was removed from the Dawson County evidence room in June of 2024 and was given to Miriam's surviving family. Her younger cousin, who is the person in that family who now keeps her memory, put it in a frame with her photograph. It hangs in a room in a house in Dahlonega. There is a question worth sitting with before we close. Dale Pritchard kept that cross for 43 years. He hid it under his foundation rather than destroying it. What does that tell us about the nature of guilt? Whether it seeks to erase or to keep. The co-worker who heard Pritchard say something that didn't sit right in 1982 put it away and didn't think about it for 20 years. How many cases like this one depend on someone finally being asked the right question? And what does it mean that a partial fingerprint sat in an envelope for 41 years, solvable by technology that already existed, while a family waited for something that never came in their lifetimes? The truth found Miriam Dale Lundquist after 44 years. It found her through a plumber's work light and a cold case detective who looked at 3 initials and recognized them. That is how this niche works. Not in the grand dramatic gesture, but in the small, specific act of paying attention. If you believe that truth found this way still counts, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More solved cold cases are waiting in the description. Thank you for being here.